Hey, and welcome back to another episode. I'm really excited about today. Have you ever felt stuck in a job that's just overbroke? Or watched a leader command respect without ever raising their voice? What if the key to unstoppable success, whether in business, life, or leadership, isn't working harder, but growing smarter, clearer, and more connected? Our guest, Sharyn Abbott, is here to show us exactly how to break those cycles and build something that lasts for yourself, your team, and even the next generation. For over 30 years, she has been a speaker, author of 11 books, including Mix It Up, The Entrepreneur New Testament, and Jobs, Just Over Broke Syndrome, and founder of Ultimate Business International. She has a new book coming out called Growing into Leadership. She has trained thousands of entrepreneurs, worked with Fortune 500 teams, keynote events from money fairs to princess cruises, and even shared a positive communication strategy on the Oprah Winfrey Show. So Sharyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm glad that we were able to make this conversation happen. And we all just heard your incredible bio and your reading. But if you don't mind, in your own words, tell us just a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I am one of the fortunate people, and when I tell my story, some people say that was fortunate, but it really was. So I grew up in a family that had a lot of abuses, but it taught me about human behavior. So I can walk into a room and I can actually decide like who needs help, who's sad, who is in pain, and I can gravitate to them and do something to make it a little easier for them. Prime example was when I used to go to the Chamber of Commerce meetings and there were the wallflowers, and I would take them out into the room and start introducing them to people because that took the attention away from me. So I didn't have to have that uncomfortable feeling of being around people I didn't know. I could just adapt the attitude like it was my party and I could introduce people to each other. So all my life, I have had things like I stuttered until I was 15. I had dyslexia. I guess I still do. All these little things that, would be a hindrance, but then I learned how to use them to my advantage. And I was 20 years in the printing industry when a company decided that I should be in sales. They had observed me on the trade show floor with clients and how I worked with them. So they talked me into being in sales, one of the greatest things in the world. So I got to work in all the Fortune 500 companies in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I talked to the vice presidents, Hewlett Packard, Varian, Sandia Labs, all these major corporations. And it opened my eyes into what a department leader would actually have to go through and how maybe at Varian, it was a softer environment than Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard was to the wall and they were making great strides into the business world in the early 80s. And so I was able to observe what was working for these different managers and what didn't work. What employees were because of the management style. And it really interested me to be able to take from each person that I met a little tidbit. Like one of the people at Hewlett Packard was so kind. He remembered every single person's birthday in his department. And I thought that was so unusual, that he went out of his way just to make sure that his employees, his group knew that he was thinking of them.
Absolutely. It's interesting. Did you find that as like an anomaly back then? Because you found it interesting. So how much was it an anomaly back then compared to today?
I would say it hasn't changed a lot, other than I believe today that leaders have become more impersonal from what I've observed. Even though there's been some great work with the Institute of Heart Math that has proven that when a company runs from the heart, they're more profitable, they're more productive, their employees are retained longer, they have a much better chance of survival in difficult times economically. What counts in a company is that the employees will rally around a company even in tough times. But if they don't feel appreciated, they're going to bail, they're going to jump ship because they know the writing's on the wall. If you remember in 2008, it was devastating. People would lay off a third of their staff, 50% of their staff, and the ones that remained had to pick up the slack for the ones who had left. And they felt so abused that the first thing they did was start looking for a job that they felt the company would be more stable and they didn't have to be worrying about being the next one to have to leave and then have no income and then have their family completely disrupted. So, I don't think it's much different. You would have thought that people would have learned from 2008, but when you have a board of directors, the board of directors' major focus is on the profitability, and they rarely care whether a company is working ethically, whether they're working in a profitability way that serves the company's focus. So there's a big difference when you look at profitability just to make profit, or is it ethical profit? So, I run into a lot of people who say, all's fair in love and war, and they believe that's how a company should be run. I mean, it was surprised me, even in Utah, that you would think in Utah it would be a lot softer, but it's worse. It was like
Really?
one of the worst environments I could ever imagine for business people, that they were, go to church on Sunday, but then stab each other in the back on Monday. And I saw that repetitively throughout Utah. And I don't understand where that mentality comes from.
Yeah, I don't either. And I find that very strange that they would have that mentality. Now, you mentioned that people are becoming more impersonal. What do you mean by that?
Well, a good example is one of my clients' fiancés brought his parents from India to spend Thanksgiving, his first Thanksgiving in the United States. And he rented a cabin up at Tahoe where they could see snow for the first time. And they get up to the cabin on Wednesday night, and he gets a call from his boss. And the boss says, if you're not back here tomorrow morning by 8, you don't have a job to come back to. I mean, that doesn't get much more impersonal than that. Um, if people only realize that when you push employees to that limit, they are destroying the loyalty that has been developed.
No, absolutely. That's a great story and a little snippet of what's actually happening in the workplace. And the one that you mentioned from 2008, I was reminded of a family friend whose company just recently went through a similar issue. They had found some unethical business practices and they had gone through an internal investigation, sold off 50% of the company's stock overnight. And employees are like, wait a second, who's going to get laid off? And then I was talking to my friend and I said, well, do you think you're going to maintain your job? Like, how do you think it's going to be? And she jokingly, kind of not jokingly, said, I kind of hope I get laid off because someone's going to have to pick up the slack for everybody else getting laid off. And that was a new perspective for me. And I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And it seems like people still haven't learned back from 2008.
No, not at all. Not at all. And, when I remember having this conversation with my uncle, and he was like, another job, another job. What are you doing? He had 2 jobs in his entire career, 2 jobs. Today, employees know that they can relocate to another environment. Like, how many people relocated to Texas just to follow Tesla? When you think about, you can move to have a job and a better lifestyle. The people who left California and moved to Texas got about a 20% bump in their income that was spendable because they didn't have to spend that 20% more that California costs compared to Texas. So people are a lot more flexible. Layoff? Okay, fine. I'll find something better. And they always do.
So that brings me back to the development piece of your folks and of your staff. When did you first realize, hey, I need to invest in my people and my staff?
That was from the get-go, and it had to do with how I was treated in a Fortune 500 company where they put me through a sales training that was rigorous. Then they put me through the Dale Carnegie courses. And if I wanted, I could have taken courses every single year. They were so adamant about continuing the education of their employees, especially the salespeople. And what I realized is I went from an introvert, somebody who is so uncomfortable being around that because of the training, I developed this not only extrovert, but this perspective of being able to tie the 2 personalities together. And I wanted to be able to create a structure where my employees, and I have this one thing that I tell everybody, if there's ever a job opening, even if we need to train you and re-educate you, we will put you in that job because I want you to be happy. I want you to jump out of bed every Monday morning excited about what you're doing. The only job you can't apply for is mine.
So when you set up that pipeline, were there some founding principles that you said these are non-negotiable? These are the founding principles that we're going to do in development.
I don't believe so because each personality is so different that I don't want to have people have to fit in. So if you look at personality types, and so my 10th book is about face, traits, tell tales. So I can look at somebody's face and I can tell the kind of personality that they are. So your personality would not fit into an environment where you had to be on stage all the time. You're more of an analytical personality. So why would I force you to do something that wouldn't suit your personality? So I can't have one model fits all. I have to have a flexibility so that some people learn kinetically, some people learn visually, some people learn audibly. Some people have to just be led through it maybe multiple times before it finally sinks in. And I want that kind of flexibility. So my training division will have the freedom to be able to create their own training programs. I was talking to a young man yesterday. He's in IT, and we were talking about how frustrating it is for an IT person in training to get people to actually learn how to use their computers and not pick up the phone and ask for help every time.
Yep. From an IT background myself, absolutely. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever remembered the TV show. It's a British one called the IT Crowd, and they always call it's about a help desk, and people always call up and they're like, "Well, have you tried turning it off and turning it on again?" It's like, is it plugged into the wall? Right? So completely agree with that. Now,
Yeah.
when it comes to the personalities and the development of those personalities and putting them in the right positions and finding that right alignment, when you develop your talent management program, how did you approach that? Because it seems like you were very much in tune with who are they, how do they operate, and what are they best suited for?
Yeah, and like I said, it's different for every person. But when I'm talking to the people in the training division, and they've always had to have, like, here's the manual, follow the manual, which is a stigma to them because if they see that something isn't working in other companies, they don't have the freedom and flexibility to embark on something that's new. And I wanted to make sure that everybody has that ability to have the fluidity of being able to, do you need to go take a class? Do you have to go to the States and sit in on a week-long training to bring your skills up to speed? What is it that each person needs? And, granted, when we have 21 campuses, I'm not sure how we're going to be able to continue to do that. But I think by setting that foundation in Belize, that will set a tone for the rest of our campuses.
Absolutely. So, for folks listening to this and watching this right now that may not have a talent management program or a talent development program that has that flexibility built in, what are the long term benefits of building in that flexibility?
So the main one that I think of, Tim, it cost a company $21,000 to hire an employee and integrate them into the system. And if I build a system where the employees feel valued and give them the best benefits that I can manage, then they're not going to jump ship just because they're frustrated. They're going to actually talk about what else can I do? Can I be retrained in this division, this department? So that's the number one benefit to a company. But imagine having a workforce that isn't disgruntled. Like one time I went into Cisco to do a training and I saw 21 people from the front of the office to the back to the training room playing solitaire at 9:30 in the morning. Those are disgruntled employees. And I asked the person who coordinated the training, I said, do you have a tablet, a pink slip tablet? And he goes, why? And I said, because I want to go back and put a pink slip on every one of those monitors of those people playing solitaire. They're not serving Cisco. They're making Cisco less competitive. The profitability of Cisco has just dropped drastically. If that's a daily practice and people feel comfortable playing solitaire just because they're not, I mean, what would they do? Get up and ask their supervisor, I have nothing to do. What else can I do? I mean, that's how I worked every single job I ever had. What else can I do? Whether it was organizing a closet or, installing a new system or, maybe reaching out and finding new clients for the company to work with. I always found a way of being busy. And I just am appalled at the lack of commitment that employees have these days. So I want to make sure that our employees are engaged and know the value that they bring to the company. And that I think will instill that kind of work ethic.
Absolutely. And I'm reminded of the recent Gallup polls where they talked about employee engagements between 25 and 33% in North
Oh,
America. And they said that that's high compared to the rest of the world, which is actually lower compared to 10 to 15%. And I'm kind of go back to the old adage of like, 20% of the people do 80% of the work.
right.
So how do we fix that? And I think you alluded to it, is making sure that they're gainfully employed. But with the training and employee growth, what is something somebody listening to this today could go, I can implement this one strategy and get better increased employee engagement?
I think it's communicating with the employees. So if you have a really good HR division, your HR people should know inside and out what each employee is capable of, what they're frustrated with. It should be an open door policy, and the HR people should be in a position to welcome that. There's a lot of HR, I've gone to a lot of HR groups, and they are one of the most disgruntled groups of people I've ever been around. Feeder to the fire all the time, and they don't feel appreciated. I believe about 10 years ago, there was a movement to make HR an XO position. And I think it would be really valuable to a company like Gillig Manufacturer in the San Francisco Bay Area. They manufacture school buses. And Denny, who is the CEO, said he pays his HR person $50,000 a year. And oh my God. And he goes, no, if I have a good HR person, then my company is going to be run much better than if I try to skimp on that one position. So he had it right. And he took that company from 9 million to 90 million in just, I think it was 6 years. So, if you, as a CEO, as an XO, if you participate in groups that brainstorm these concepts, you'll walk away with so much more information because you can't stay in your own world and learn something new. You have to go outside of your environment to be able to see what are other people doing that's working.
That's a great point. And one thing I really liked in the conversation we've had about growth of people, you've talked about delegation a lot without necessarily saying delegation. So, what are some of the challenges that prevent people from delegating?
Ownership in a lot of companies that I have seen and that I've worked with, the XO management and maybe two tiers below down to a general manager, they want to impress the upper echelon. So they want to take credit for what employees come up with. And that's always a detriment to a company. So if you can involve the people in the accolades, then you're going to have a much stronger team. So it's not us against them. One of the companies that I worked with, there was a kind of I don't even know how to say it, but it wasn't combative, but it might as well have been between service and sales. And they can't operate without each other. So service wouldn't have a job if sales didn't do a good job. And sales can't be supported if a service won't do a good job. So they have to be supportive. And somewhere along the line, that company culture created that divide. So if a senior officer in a company knows that there is conflict within the company, they have to address it and address it now. So whether it's one-on-one meetings or team meetings, they have to be able to, my apologies, they have to be able to address it rapidly because that could be the downfall of the company. That could be the beginning of the end.
So, if I'm struggling with delegation, I'm struggling with culture, what is something that somebody listening to this or watching this could do to help fix that?
I would immediately start having open door meetings. There, even in the team, there is a leader in the team who is kind of a natural leader. They are the ones who know what are the conversations going on when the management isn't in sight. Those conversations are what will be so valuable to the leader, the XOs. Knowing when somebody is angry because they have to work overtime on Saturday and they're missing their kid's baseball game. Working angry is not going to do a good job. Right. And there are people like when I was running a division at the California State University at Chico, I gave people the option, if you're single and you want to make more money, then you can work the overtime. And then the ones who had family, they had the option, but most of them chose not to have overtime because they needed to spend time with their families. And I thoroughly support that. So being able to maybe even pass that down to somebody who's closer to the team would say, okay, this person is better to work overtime. This person shouldn't have to. And as long as the job gets done, I always wonder, like the young man who had to go back from Tahoe to San Jose, what was so urgent that he had to give up his Thanksgiving weekend with his family? And did it make or break the company? I mean, was it really that urgent, or was it just somebody deciding that they had a power play? And so thinking about employees should be treated like family to a degree. You wouldn't abuse your family, so don't abuse your employees. When you find somebody that is a natural leader, somebody who's able to calm the team down or to encourage them, then you use those skills to be able to keep constant communication going with the team and what the upper management needs to accomplish. Sometimes if the team just knows why, it makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. You've been talking a lot about the underlying building trust, right? All of this assumes that trust is there and we have trust, or we're eroding trust by having people go from one location to another location based on, a power play and a whim. So what are some of the real world examples that you have seen that eroded trust, like no kidding? And what are some of the best things that we can do to help continue to build trust on a daily basis?
Well, I think the best example was when, Hewlett Packard shifted from just printers and went into the PC line. And then the people who were working with the printers felt as though they were being neglected because all the focus and energy was going into the PCs. It was necessary for HP to do that, but at the same time, they didn't take the time to explain to the printer division the necessity. Why was it that they needed to do that? Maybe they felt they didn't have a responsibility and it was not important, but it definitely was important because they lost a lot of people in the printing division at that time. If there's this one attitude everywhere that you don't need to know unless you need to know. It's on a need to know basis, right? I think that really destroys the unity in a cultural environment in a company. It was like, even if you just had to have postings, like I have a newsletter that goes out to the employees and I inform them of everything that's going on, good or bad, and I ask the core group of directors, would you rather hear it or would you rather I just keep it to myself? And they said, no, they'd rather hear it. So even asking that question makes a big difference in our communications and our trust, because now I have built such a wonderful level of trust with all my group. I have 525 people coming from 68 countries to launch my project. I mean, that's incredible when you think about it's an idea. It's something that these people believe in, and they believe in me, which I value so much, so that I respect them in return to give them the information that they need to make decisions that affect their lives.
So you have built that trust over your whole entire career and ingrained that in your reputation and your personality and who you are. But what about those folks who are just starting out and they're like, you know what? I'm struggling trusting my folks because I've been burned before. And anytime I delegate or anytime I let it out and trust them, I seem to be let down. How can we help foster the trust and the delegation?
So I kind of look at this as, how somebody gets a divorce and they're angry and they're never going to trust another person again, right? Kind of the same thing, isn't it? If an employee or an employer gets burned in one way or another, that's on that one situation. So I don't believe anyone should judge a company or an employee based on previous experiences. You might learn from the previous experience, and that's necessary. But you don't have to buy in that everybody is going to be the same. And if an employee feels like now they took this job because they got burned on the last job, they got laid off, and they had to go through months and months of unemployment. And now they finally have a job, but they know that this company is going to do the same thing. They're shooting themselves in the foot. That just isn't ever going to work. So to have an open mind, to look at from both sides, from management and the employees both, have to have a level of trust walking in the door. Like, I've always been accused of, I give people 100% of my trust, and then they can whittle it down and to the point where it might get to be 80%, and then I become really cautious of that person. Where most people walk in, they have no trust at all, and you have to earn the trust to build it up to the 80%. Well, I believe the way I do it, and it's very natural to me, it's not something I decided, is much more productive long term.
It seems like it. And you've got a lot of experience to back it up. So I would say for folks listening to this and watching this, go ahead and try it out and see what happens. And I'm pretty sure you'll be pleasantly surprised, because I have the same mentality as you do, Sharon, is that, you know, I give people trust and then it dwindles from there based off of data points over time. And so I'm glad that you also have that same perspective. So at least I know I'm on the right track. And other people who have the same mentality, they're on the right track as well too. I do want to kind of transition a little bit over to your recent book that you're writing, Growing into Leadership. Could you just kind of share a little bit of how you came up with it and why you wrote the book?
So there is this big gap between being an entrepreneur, which I've been for the last 30, to going into running a corporation. And my concern was, I want everything to be the way my vision sees it. Right. But then if I'm hiring the best people, I can't step on them just to micromanage and make sure that every little detail that I need to have in place. So I started thinking about all these companies. Like, there's a consulting group called Visage, and I used to teach some courses for them. I would go in and help some of the business owners, and I was really amazed at how 50% of the CEOs were typically like, it's got to be this way. They're very hard and fast. And, that was my dad. And so I didn't want to repeat that because it was his way or the highway. And I wanted to be able to have this flexibility of, there's more than one way to do everything, and it doesn't have to be my way. And if it's more convenient for you and more productive for you to do it your way, then why would I force you to do it the way I see it? And so that's how the concept of the book got started. And the more of the CEOs that I started talking with, they have no one to talk with. They're at the top. So they can't vent to their vice president, because then that usurps the trust that the vice president has in them of being a capable CEO. And so where do they go? I mean, they can go home and talk to their family, but the family doesn't really have the experience to be able to relate to what they're going through. And so I wanted to create a book that is an easy read, that it starts from the very first day that you're a leader. What do you do to instill that trust and respect and not have people have that fear? Like, if you've ever worked for somebody in the military where, every time they walk in, you go, "Oh," you know, you, you, you don't want that in a company. So there's this fine line. And I was trying to figure out, is there a defining line between the friendly XO and the respected authoritative XO? And so that's what this book actually really focuses on, is how you grow from, this is the first day as a leader, into the end of your career, and what it is that it takes for you to have this ability to be really proud of what you've done, the structure that you've created, being able to bring other people up who are capable of being managers. And I think that because of some of the people that I've worked for, that was tantamount to what I feel makes a successful leader. Somebody who sees the skills that people have and then utilizes those skills and then turns that into a very positive atmosphere for the employees to see they're not going to be stuck on the line the rest of their life. They have an opportunity to move through the cultural environment of the company. And, if there are people who they're driven, they go out and take college courses, and they, go out and experience things that will support their job or their future job that they want. And not everybody's like that. So having somebody grow into leadership is like, I believe, and this is probably kind of strange, but if I can do it, I think anybody can. Not that everybody wants to, but I really enjoy the idea that I can create this incredible environment and have everybody else feel empowered to be able to be productive and to be respected. And I think that's the number one key of employees feeling that they're respected.
Absolutely. And so, Sharon, what we're going to do is we're going to provide the links in the description of this episode so everyone can get to your amazing stuff and be able to pick your brain if they needed to. But before we go, I kind of want to leave it with you. Is there anything that we didn't talk about, or is there any topic, that question I didn't ask you that you're like, you know what, Tim, I really would have liked it if you would ask us one question.
I guess the main thing that I would like people to understand who are in leadership roles is that you have to take care of yourself first. So, just like that adage of being on an airplane, you put the air mask on yourself first so that you can take care of other people. A lot of XOs do not do things to take care of themselves, like going to courses where they can absorb what other people are doing, or taking a day with their family to get rejuvenated, or being able to play golf during the week with peers, finding a peer group that, just when you're playing golf and you're bantering about, and it really does replenish your energy. Because what I see is a lot of XOs being so deplete in their energy, their focus, and they have to always be on. It's like being on stage. They always have to be up. And that's a hard role to fill.
Absolutely. So, Sharon, I really appreciate you being here. And for everyone watching us and listening to this, go in the descriptions, get all the links, and reach out to Sharon. You will not be disappointed. So, Sharon, thank you again.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you, Tim. It's been fun.